Hello, Yu-Gi-Oh players, and welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0. So let's go round 2 of my January 2014 Banlist According to Logic video series. I'm listening to some awesome F777 on my earbuds right now, so I'm going to be rocking out this entire video. So what I'm going to be talking about in this particular discussion is a set of cards that could plausibly be massive profit sinks for Konami in the future. And this is via a set of decks that I am pretty sure are going to be pretty significant selling points for Konami in the near future. They've got a lot of big cards coming out. Konami's been making exclusives for them, things like that. And they're going to be things that could potentially make a good amount of money for Konami, which means that they're going to want to protect those decks as much as possible. So I've got this list here of things that kill these particular decks. And I'll go down that in a second. Sorry, this is my usual tally sheet. I've been kind of using this same document for this video for ages. Anyway, so first off, 2 rules that we have to think about before going into this list. The first rule is that Konami, based on the last TCG list, Konami tends to limit or ban cards that reduce player interaction. Those are cards that either create those expanded unlimited plays that I talked about before, or have a blanket effect on a deck that stalls out, that just blocks plays entirely. For instance, they hit, as far as the expanded plays, things like Gateway of the Six, and then they hit Royal Tribute, which causes a blanket stall. It causes lockdowns. Via Necro value. You've also got things like Macro and D-Fissure, which got hit on the last list because they give a blanket block to interaction. And that is the kind of thing that Konami is going to be hitting the most. The second main rule is Konami tends to try and justify these picks by targeting them toward things that have been abused in the current format, or have been used a lot in the current format, or have a particular loop or lock associated with the current format. So those are the 2 rules that we are going to have to pay attention to when we're going through this list. So why don't I just run down the decks that I have written out here. Of course, if you see, or if you don't see one that you think will be a major selling point, hit the comments below and I will try to reply to as many as possible. So let's get to it. First off, Vampires. Vampires are basically the main focus of Shadow Specters as far as selling point cards, as well as Noble Knights, which is their neighbor on this list. So Konami definitely has investment interests in making sure that Vampires actually survive into the next format. So things that hit Vampires: Shadowmere, Macro, Fissure, and that's D-Fissure, by the way. Emptiness, Iron Wall, Max C, MST, Veiler, Skill Drain, Thunder King, Mistake. Things that hit Noble Knights: Macro, D-Fissure, Anti-Spell, Fragrance, Veiler, Really Eternal Rest, Light Mirror, Skill Drain, and Mistake. And then Bujin is another thing that Konami is going to have massive amounts of investment in. We know that they definitely got a huge boost from Shadow Specters, and they're going to want to push this deck even more in the future, which actually throws a wrench into my predictions, which I'll get to later. They also have a lot of support coming out in Legacy of the Valiant. They're hurt by Macro, D-Fissure, Iron Wall, MST, Light Mirror, Mind Drain, Soul Drain, Thunder King, and Mistake. Then Ghost Tricks, similar to Bujin's, have a lot of cards coming in Legacy of the Valiant, and they are hurt by Light of Intervention, Shadowmere, Darksimorg, MST, and Skill Drain. Next, we go on to Monarchs, which Konami is coming out with all of these Monarch support cards, including the Mega Monarchs. So it makes sense that Konami might try to protect them. Macro and D-Fissure tend to be a problem for Monarchs, mostly because most of the engines that put them on the board for relatively low cost rely on the graveyard, things like the Chaos Dragon engine, or the, of course, the Treeborn Frog engine. Those are the ones I can think of right now. There is one. The reason why I put these in question marks is because there is one engine that they do that actually relies on Macro and D-Fissure. It isn't very good right now, so I don't think that it'll make that big a difference in Konami's decision, but there is the Macro Monarch engine that exists with DD Survivor and such. But I don't think that that'll make a huge difference. I just put them in question marks just to be sure that I covered that particular point. And Monarchs are also hurt by Vanity's Emptiness. because it stops special summons once again. And they're also hit by Fossil Dyna. Most of the things that are hurt by Emptiness are hurt by Fossil Dyna, which is something to consider, but I think it's a little less likely that Konami goes after Fossil Dyna than Vanity's Emptiness. Then there's Gozen Match. Skill Drain is really painful to Monarchs. Pulling the Rug is just kind of the counter trap that hits them. And then Effect Veiler. Archfiends are getting some support. They're getting a V-Jump promo, which means that Konami is not going to take them into account that much. We know that they have been trying to make a couple exclusives for Archfiends, which may mean that we will get more in the future. But right now it doesn't look like they're a major selling point. It just looks like the V-Jump promo exists. So you've got Shadow Mirror, Macro Fissure, and MST hurt them. I usually put in MST for decks that really get hurt by losing one particular continuous spell or trap card. And for Archfiends, that card is Skill Drain. Then you've got Shinra as a major deck that's going to be coming out in the future. And they're hurt by Macro Fissure, Gozen Match, Vanity's Emptiness, Soul Drain, and Skill Drain. Then finally, that isn't finally, I've got two more. Lightsworn are hurt by Macro Fissure, Light Mirror, Skill Drain, and Veiler. Lightsworn are, of course, getting their own, their own pack set deck thing. And that's going to be a major selling point for Konami. And then finally we have Geargia, which are also going to be getting their own pack thing and their own V-Jump promo, just like Lightsworns. They're hurt by Emptiness, Veiler, Maxi, Macro, Fissure, Ryo, and Mistake. Harpies I put on there, but then I realized right afterward they really aren't a selling point for Konami anymore, aside from the Big Eye reprint is going to kind of be helped by Harpy sales, I suppose. Harpies have basically gotten all the sales that they're going to get. So I'm just not going to cover those on the list. So one of the things we have to look at here is there a pattern between cards that are particularly painful for the future meta? Well, one thing that I have definitely seen, Macro and D-Fissure hurt most of these decks, except maybe like Ghost Trick, which doesn't really interact with the graveyard all that much. And that's pretty much it. They're all hurt by Macro and D-Fissure to a degree. I'm not sure if Konami would go as far as banning these two cards. It seems like Konami, the reason why these cards got hit last format is because they were abused last format at 2s and 3s. So while people aren't going to be citing these cards as much, even if they do hit or they do hurt the decks that I have listed here, it just seems really unlikely to me that Konami would attempt to ban these cards or would actually ban these cards. Why do I say attempt? They're the bosses here. Yeah, so at this point it's just a side deck card. It isn't actually being mained like in Macro Rabbit, etc. So the next card that really shows up a lot, just going down my list of vampires over here, is Vanity's Emptiness. Vanity's Emptiness shows up in Vampires. It shows up, it should show up for Ghost Tricks. I don't know why it doesn't. For Monarchs, for Shinra, and for, not so much for Lightsworns. And for Geargia. So those are a bunch of decks that are hurt by Vanity's Emptiness. And it's definitely true that Emptiness limits interaction. Once you put an Emptiness on the board, your opponent has to fish for MSTs. And then you've basically got a stall-out game at that point. It's also been run in 2s and 3s in a lot of decks, which means it would merit getting limited. And so it fits the list, definitely. I think that it's more likely to get limited than something like semi-limited, mostly because I don't see it really making a difference if they just semi-limit it. Going down the list, Iron Wall is actually a problem for a surprising number of these decks. I didn't put it down for Lightsworns. I'm not sure if I still would. It does hurt their Chaos portions, but that's only like 2 cards, so that isn't much of an issue for them. But it does hurt Vampires and Boojins, which are 2 major selling points for Konami. So I think I could see it getting semi-limited or limited, but in all honesty, I don't see it getting hit. but it is one of those cards to look out for. The next card on the list that I think you need to look out for is MST. Notice how there are about four decks on here that are weak to MST. They're mostly decks that rely on a lot of continuous back row in order to run properly. The problem with hitting MST is the vast majority of these decks that are hurt by MST are also hurt by things that MST gets rid of. So I think that MST is something to look out for, but I don't think it's very probable that it's going to get hit. Valor, I've been skipping the hand traps because they aren't cards that specifically limit player interaction, so they aren't something to look out for so much. The next card on the list is Skill Drain. Skill Drain is a big one, and I think Skill Drain is going to get hit hard by this format. Because let's see. Skill Drain is a problem for Noble Knights, Vampires, Monarchs, Ghost Tricks, Lightsworns, Shinra, and Girya. So I didn't actually put Skill Drain under Girya, but you get the idea. Skill Drain is a huge problem, and what have we seen with Skill Drain? It's been mained and cited in Dragon Rulers this format, and it's caused some spectacular issues for the Tier 2 decks and things like Vampires, things like Noble Knights, etc., etc. And Mecha Phantom Beast is something I totally forgot on this list, but they really only have one selling point coming out in the near future. So Skill Drain is a major issue. It's been abused. It limits player interaction. I think it's a shoo-in for getting hit in the next format. Thunder King, I can see, but it's not going to be a colossal issue since there will be so much monster removal in the next format, even for decks that are hurt by things like Mistake and Thunder King. It is a huge problem for Girya, but they have ways of getting around it. They have things like, D-Prison and stuff like that. You can side against Ryo. I don't think Konami will go as far as banning it. I did not talk about Sixth Sense on any of these lists, mostly because it doesn't really hurt any of these decks. But one of the things we have to look at with this is how much does Sixth Sense help any of these decks. It's kind of good for Bujin. It's pretty good for Lightsworn. Shinra couldn't care less about it. I can see it getting banned, this format. They've sold their Joey's World. They're not going to try as much anymore. I don't see any reason why they would have any motivation to keep it around. It definitely doesn't really give any extra edge to Bujins and Lightsworns, which are going to be getting the most power out of the near future. So the cards that I think we definitely need to look out for are Macro, D-Fissure. Emptiness is a big one. I think it's highly likely that that card gets limited. Iron Wall is a thing to look out for. Skill Drain is the other big one. I think Skill Drain is a shoo-in to get limited. So that is the Konami profit look at investments for the future and the decks that are coming out in the near future. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why. And then subscribe for more Yu-Gi-Oh! Analysis, discussion, and general shenanigans. Meanwhile, thank you guys for watching Yu-Gi-Oh! And Business Casual. I'm your host, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.